All right, everybody, this is Ross. In this video, I wanted to talk to you guys today about the Dave Wilson Nursery style of planting fruit trees, which is kind of what we have right here. In that one of the ways that Dave Wilson Nursery promotes that the average backyard grower plants their fruit trees is actually to plant multiple varieties in the same hole, because there's a number of benefits with that. The first benefit is you have different varieties in close proximity, so you get good cross-pollination. You get good fruit set that way. You need multiple varieties to pollinate other trees to ensure that you actually get good fruit set. Now, the other big reason here is actually a succession of harvests. So if, as an example here, I have a number of different plums, I have a number of different pluots, I have 2 different apricots here, so I'm not just getting one crop of apricots or one crop of plums at one time, because the average backyard grower, we can't eat 200, 500 plums at one time. We want them over a longer season, a longer period of harvest. So by having different varieties here, we're able to enjoy a harvest that's over a longer period of time. And it makes a ton of sense. And I think the benefits are valid. And I also think that Dave Wilson Nursery does a great job. I love Tom Spellman. I think they're doing a wonderful thing for the average backyard grower. As an educator myself of people who grow fruit in a backyard, I would love to see more of their videos. And I love their videos. But I just don't think this style of planting is really such a great idea. I think especially for the average backyard grower, to me this just doesn't make a ton of sense. I think the alternative is, instead of planting multiple varieties in the same hole in a very close proximity, you just plant one tree right in the middle, and then we graft multiple varieties onto that. I think that's easier. I think that's easier to maintain. And I think for the average person, it's just better. Now for me, this is one of 4 plantings that I've done over the years in this style. And you can kind of see what I've created is that we need to make sure that there's good airflow, because this is really the big problem with fruit and growing fruit, is that you have to have good airflow, because especially for me, and maybe not Tom Spellman in California where it's very dry, we struggle highly with disease. Growing fruit in a humid place in the mid-Atlantic, you're inevitably going to run into disease. So it's really critical to have, if we don't have a drier climate, to have good airflow and to have, an open center to our trees. So if this was, imagine one tree, we would typically prune these plums and these apricots to something like an open center, a vase shape. And that would get us good airflow right through the middle, and we'd have a pretty good chance at preventing a lot of disease that way. So, but if you can imagine, this planting has to kind of be an open center, except that it starts from the ground. And I don't know if really people totally understand that concept. So when we're planting these trees and when we're taking care of these and we're pruning these trees, we need to be able to walk through the center. We need to be able to position each and every tree really away from each other so that they're growing outwards away, because all this stuff here in the center creates issues. And I have in the past, especially last year with this particular pluot here that I'm looking at, I had a lot of plums that last year, and unfortunately a lot of the growth here was just shaded, and we had a lot of disease pressure. And I didn't ripen, although I ripened, every single pluot on the tree, I didn't get to enjoy a single pluot. So it just goes to show you that this, although you'll be able to get to see fruit, your trees will grow, they'll do just fine planted in the same hole. I mean, that was a big concern of a lot of people in the beginning, where they're like, oh, the trees are so close together, they're going to compete for nutrients, they're going to compete for water. That has been the least of my concerns. It's really been in the fact that this whole thing in the center, and even in the summer coming up, even though I've pruned out most of the growth here that goes towards the middle, a lot of this is going to fill in, and I have to maintain that. I have to come in here, as I do with any open center fruit tree, is come in here and make sure the middle throughout the summer is kept and pruned and kept tidy, because otherwise the airflow that is present will very quickly disappear, and by the time the fruits ripen, again, we're going to have not enough airflow, we're going to have disease, and I'm not going to be able to eat my fruits. The other major thing is the light, because when having an open center like this, you're not only maximizing the airflow, but you're maximizing the photosynthesis that these trees receive. And maximizing that photosynthesis gets you the highest fruit quality possible among the fruits. That's how you get the highest Brix, the highest soluble sugar. So the problem then becomes, well, if you don't plant these trees, I find, properly, you don't train them properly, you just have a jumbled mess. Really, it's a jungle. And the trees grow very quickly into each other. Yeah, the general rule of thumb is to prune out a lot of the things that are growing towards each other, right? Crisscrossing branches. But this can just, I find for the average person, I think can be a bit more difficult. And the benefits are just not greater, let's say, than if I were to plant one tree where I'm standing and graft multiple varieties onto it. So that's my gripe here. That's what I'm really trying to get at, is that I don't think this is a bad idea, but I just certainly think there are better ideas. And this tree right here is an example of something you don't want to do, where this tree is planted directly in the center of this whole thing. So this is creating airflow problems and sunlight problems just by this tree being here. I've tried to, of course, get the growth to come this way as the direction it should be growing in. But again, this whole thing is just, over the years I've learned, a problem. Now that I've definitely ripened some fruit, all these trees have gotten to a certain age where they can actually produce high quality fruit, and I was just sorely disappointed. Now I've learned my lesson, but I will show you guys the peaches in the front over here, which are done in a very similar fashion, and I think actually works to a much higher degree. And this is, I think, exactly what you would want in a planting of this kind, where you have these plums, these peaches. This here is a nectarine, but the rest of these, and they all fruit very similarly. They're all in a similar rootstock. They're all standards, but you can see exactly what I've done. I've pruned out the center, but all the trees are on a nice angle. I've planted them in the same hole and made sure that they're all on their own little angle here, so that each of these trees, these trunks, instead of having a trunk that comes up and then the open center that comes up from that vase shape, these are all the permanent scaffolds of that open center, is each individual tree. So it works. I'm not going to say it doesn't work, but again, a very similar problem here happened last year. You have to really know what you're doing when it comes to pruning, because all this growth here, as you can imagine how big this cut was, how big this branching was here in the center, just creates these giant issues that you won't even realize are happening until later in the season when you actually ripen this fruit. So I think for me, that's where my money's at. This, of course, works. I'm not going to say it doesn't, but I would, of course, rather, knowing what I know now, I've been growing fruit for a number of years now, I just prefer, this is just something, and I've learned this is just something I think for the average person, the average backyard grower, is more difficult, than planting one tree and grafting multiple varieties onto it. Grafting really isn't that difficult. It actually is kind of a joke. So very basic amount of skill needed, and the pruning, of course, will always be required. To learn that pruning skill is a lot harder, though, to maintain this particular planting, in my personal opinion. So anyway, guys, if you've done something like this, let me know down in the comments. What do you think? I get asked this question a lot, and that's why I'm making this video, because I know a lot of you guys know that I've planted the trees like this. You know that I have also planted them in containers, and of course, I'd rather put them in the ground, and I'd rather just have one individual tree with, again, multiple varieties grafted onto it. So thank you again. Thanks for watching. We'll see you for the next one. Take care.